Exactly a year after my divorce finalized, my sister Imani found me sitting in a hospital waiting room. She leaned down, her designer perfume suffocating the clinical air around us, and smirked. Still going to appointments alone. Marcus did well leaving you. Then she lowered her voice so our parents standing just feet away could not hear. He has a son now, you know, with Chloe, the woman you called your best friend. Does it hurt? My parents stood there staring at their phones, pretending they heard nothing. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I just smiled up at her perfectly contoured face and asked, "Is that the script you paid him to memorize?" Exactly 5 minutes later, the waiting room doors slid open. Marcus walked in, clutching a stack of bank files, looking like a man walking to his own execution. Imani lost all color in her face. Before I share the rest of this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to dismantle a toxic family member piece by piece. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on tracking dirty money, finding hidden assets, and exposing lies that people think are buried forever. Growing up in Atlanta, my family was completely obsessed with maintaining the perfect image of Black excellence. My father Calvin and my mother Beatrice cared more about country club memberships, charity galas, and appearances than they ever cared about genuine connection. They raised us to view relationships as transactions. My older sister Imani at 35 was their absolute masterpiece. She married Liam, a wealthy white financial investor, securing her place in the highest social circles of the city. I, on the other hand, was always the family disappointment. I chose to marry Marcus, a man with a modest income, but what I thought was a good heart. When Marcus suddenly left me a year ago, claiming he had fallen in love with my best friend Chloe, my family did not offer a shoulder to cry on, they offered judgment. We were all gathered at the prestigious Emory University Hospital that Tuesday afternoon. My beloved Aunt Denise, the only relative who ever showed me unconditional warmth and actual love, was undergoing a critical surgery. My parents and Imani were only there to put on a show for the elite medical staff. They sat in the private waiting suite, wearing perfectly tailored clothes, speaking in hushed, practiced tones whenever a doctor or nurse passed by, to make sure everyone knew how supportive and wealthy they were. I sat slightly apart from them, working on my laptop. That was when Imani decided she had played the concerned niece long enough and turned her attention to her favorite sport, which was tearing me down to make herself feel superior. She glided over to my chair, crossing her legs elegantly, and began her psychological assault. She twisted the knife about Marcus and Chloe, acting as though she was merely sharing harmless gossip rather than deliberately trying to break my spirit in a public place. She asked me if I felt completely empty knowing my husband chose my best friend over me. She spoke with a sickening sweetness that was designed to provoke a reaction. My mother Beatrice chimed in right on cue. She adjusted her expensive diamond necklace and sighed dramatically, staring at me with profound pity. Being a forensic accountant does not keep a man warm at night. Zuri, my mother said, her voice laced with that familiar toxic disappointment she had used on me since childhood. You spend all your time digging through spreadsheets, interrogating strangers, and looking for flaws. Look at Imani. She knows how to nurture a high-value marriage with Liam. She understands what a successful man needs to feel important. You brought this divorce on yourself by being too independent, too stubborn, and too cold. If you had just softened up a bit, Marcus never would have strayed. I absorbed their verbal abuse without shedding a single tear. A year ago, their words would have crushed me entirely. I would have internalized the blame and spent weeks wondering what was wrong with me. But the woman sitting in that hospital chair was not the heartbroken wife from a year ago. I was a professional investigator who had spent the last 12 months uncovering a financial conspiracy that led straight back to the woman smirking beside me. I looked at my mother and my sister, analyzing their behavior the exact same way I would analyze a fraudulent ledger. Every insult they hurled at me was just a desperate attempt to cover up a massive deficit in their own morality. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel like a success. But I knew the truth, and I was about to initiate the most devastating audit of their lives. Imani noticed my complete lack of reaction, and it clearly irritated her. She thrived on my tears and my apologies. She needed me to break down to validate her own superiority. She leaned closer, her eyes glittering with malice, trying to push even harder to get a dramatic emotional reaction out of me. She asked me if I was going to buy a gift for the new baby. She asked if it made me feel like less of a woman, knowing that Chloe could easily give Marcus the family I never did. Instead of reacting to her venom, I calmly closed my laptop. I reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a certified document I had obtained entirely legally during the course of my ongoing fraud investigation. I unfolded the paper and smoothed it out on the glass coffee table between us. "What is that?" Imani asked, a flicker of genuine confusion replacing her arrogant smirk. I looked directly into her eyes and kept my voice perfectly level. "This is a paternity test result," I said clearly, making sure my parents sitting across the room could hear every single word. I picked up the paper and read the results aloud in the quiet waiting room. "It confirms with absolute medical certainty that the baby Chloe just had is not fathered by Marcus. In fact, Chloe has not spoken to Marcus in over 2 years. The baby belongs to her fiancé, a man she has been quietly living with in North Carolina." The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. My mother slowly lowered her phone. My father turned around in his chair, his brow furrowed in confusion. Imani blinked rapidly, her perfectly manicured hands twitching as she tried to process how I possessed this information and what it ultimately meant for her. I leaned forward and trapped my sister in the elaborate lie she had built. "If Chloe's baby is not his," I asked softly, "why is Marcus running around Atlanta, telling everyone he left me because he got my best friend pregnant? Why did he use that specific humiliating story to ruin my reputation and destroy my friendships? Who gave him that highly specific script, Imani?" Imani started to stammer. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched my perfectly composed sister stumble over her words. She tried to deflect, laughing, a high, nervous sound that echoed uncomfortably against the hospital walls. "Why would I know anything about your pathetic ex-husband's lies?" She deflected, her voice shaking slightly. "You are paranoid, Zuri. You are obsessed with numbers and investigations, and now you are making up wild conspiracy theories because you cannot handle the simple fact that nobody wants you." But the psychological warfare had officially shifted. I was no longer the scapegoat sister absorbing their constant blows. I was the one directing the interrogation, and Imani was visibly crumbling under the pressure. I knew exactly why she had chosen Chloe as the fictional mistress. Chloe and I had had a falling out years ago over a business disagreement, making it the perfect believable lie to sell to our social circle. It was designed to maximize my humiliation and isolate me from any support. Imani had calculated every detail of my emotional destruction, but she had failed to calculate that I would use my professional skills to verify the story. She kept trying to gaslight me, telling my parents that my grief was making me delusional. But her shaking hands and darting eyes told a completely different story. The trap was set, and she had just walked right into it. I watched her squirm in her designer dress. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She wanted to invalidate my reality entirely, to make my parents think I was having a severe mental breakdown right there in the hospital, so they would dismiss everything I said. My father, Calvin, stepped forward, his face flushed with sudden anger. "Zuri, put those ridiculous papers away." Right now, he demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "We are in a public place. Your sister is a respected member of this community, and Liam's colleagues work at this very hospital. Stop causing a scene and embarrassing us over a man who did not want you." I did not even look at my father. I kept my eyes locked firmly on Imani. "I am not causing a scene," I replied with absolute calm. "I am presenting a financial audit." Just as Imani tried to laugh off the DNA test as a fabricated fake, trying desperately to regain her social footing, the heavy glass doors of the waiting room slid open. Marcus walked in. The man I had loved and married looked absolutely terrified. He had lost significant weight, his clothes hung loosely on his frame, and he was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning of the hospital. He clutched a thick manila folder to his chest like a protective shield. When Imani saw him, she physically recoiled, pressing herself back into her chair, as if trying to merge with the upholstery. My father, Calvin, erupted immediately. He marched toward Marcus, his voice echoing in the clinical hallway, completely forgetting his own rule about not making a scene. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, pointing a finger at my ex-husband. "How dare you show your face to this family after what you did to my daughter? You need to leave immediately before I call security and have you dragged out of here." He was putting on a fantastic performance of the protective father, completely oblivious to the bitter irony that he was protecting the wrong daughter entirely. I stood up smoothly and stepped directly between my father and my ex-husband. "I invited him," I said calmly. My father stopped in his tracks, staring at me as if I had grown a second head. "You invited the man who disgraced our family," my mother gasped, clutching her chest dramatically. "Why on earth would you do that after he humiliated you?" I looked at my parents, then turned my gaze back to Imani, who was now trembling visibly. "My firm just finished auditing a very interesting shell company," I explained, my voice echoing with pure professional detachment. "We found a massive, undeniable trail of misappropriated funds, and Marcus was officially subpoenaed to explain his sudden influx of cash. He came here today to give you all a private preview of his confession before the federal investigators arrive at your doorstep next week." I stepped aside, leaving Marcus standing face to face with the family that had paid him to destroy me. Marcus refused to even glance in Imani's direction. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the floor, his hands shaking violently as he bypassed. My father ignored my mother's shocked gasp and handed the thick manila folder directly to me. He looked broken, defeated by his own greed, and ready to turn on the person who had bought his loyalty. The stage was perfectly set, the players were all present, and the financial execution of my sister was about to begin. Marcus stood frozen under the fluorescent hospital lights. He looked at the folder in my hands, then up at my face, completely ignoring my parents and Imani. He did not waste time with apologies or pleasantries. His voice cracked rough and desperate, as he blurted out the truth we all had been dancing around. "I never slept with Chloe," he said, the words rushing out of his mouth like blood from a deep wound. "I never touched her. I have not even seen her since your birthday dinner 3 years ago. The baby is not mine. The affair was a complete fabrication. Every single word I said to you the night I packed my bags and walked out was a scripted lie." My mother let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. My father stepped forward, his fists clenched, but before either of them could interrupt, Marcus kept going, his voice rising in volume, fueled by the sheer panic of a man who knew federal investigators were breathing down his neck. "I was drowning in debt," Marcus confessed, wiping a heavy layer of sweat from his forehead. "I owed money on the car, the credit cards were maxed out, and my firm was threatening to let me go. I was desperate. And then she came to me." He finally pointed a shaking finger directly at Imani, who flinched as if she had been physically struck. "She approached me a year ago. She told me she would clear all my debts and give me enough cash to start over, but only if I followed her exact instructions. She paid me to humiliate you, Zuri. She paid me to demand a divorce, to make it as loud and public as possible, and to specifically use Chloe's name so that your entire support system would collapse overnight. She wanted you completely destroyed." The air in the waiting room turned to ice. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. I watched my sister's perfectly constructed mask slip, revealing the terrified, cornered predator underneath. But the true horror of the moment did not come from Imani. It came from my parents. Any normal father would have grabbed the man who just admitted to accepting a cash bribe to destroy his daughter's life. Any normal mother would have wrapped her arms around her betrayed child and demanded answers from the sister who orchestrated such a sociopathic scheme. But Calvin and Beatrice were not normal parents. They were social climbers, masquerading as a family. My father did not look at Imani with disgust. He turned his absolute unbridled fury onto Marcus. You are a pathetic, broke loser trying to extort my successful daughter. Calvin screamed, his voice booming down the sterile hospital corridor. How dare you walk into this facility and spew these disgusting lies? Imani is married to Liam. She is married to a top-tier investor. She lives in a penthouse in Buckhead. She would never stoop to interacting with trash like you, let alone pay you for anything. You are just a bitter, failed man trying to shake down a wealthy woman because you could not handle being married to her sister. My mother was instantly at my father's side, placing a manicured hand on his arm to calm him, then turning her venomous gaze onto me. Zuri, do not listen to a single word this lunatic says. Beatrice hissed, her tone shifting into that familiar condescending register she used whenever she wanted to rewrite my reality. Look at him. He is sweating. He is unkempt. He is clearly suffering from some kind of severe substance abuse or a mental breakdown. He ruined your marriage because he is a flawed, weak man, and now he is trying to drag your sister down to his level to get a quick payout. You need to call security and have him thrown out right now before anyone from the country club sees us associating with him. I stood my ground, gripping the manila folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. They were doing it again. They were actively gaslighting me, trying to warp the truth to protect the family's immaculate elite reputation. They did not care that I had spent the last 12 months in intensive therapy, crying myself to sleep, wondering why my husband and my best friend had betrayed me so viciously. They did not care about the weight I had lost, the panic attacks I had suffered, or the absolute humiliation I endured when our mutual friends cut me off, because Marcus had spread the fake narrative so convincingly. All Calvin and Beatrice cared about was protecting the golden child, who gave them access to elite charity galas and luxury yachts. I am not calling security, I said, my voice cutting through their shouting like a freshly sharpened blade. And he is not lying. You are acting hysterical, Zuri, my father commanded, stepping closer to me, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into submission. I will not allow you to project your failed marriage onto your sister. Imani has a pristine reputation to uphold. Liam's firm does business with the executive board members of this very hospital. If anyone hears this trash making these baseless accusations, it could jeopardize Liam's standing, which jeopardizes this entire family. Give me that folder right now. He reached out to snatch the manila folder from my hands, but I stepped back smoothly, my eyes locking onto his, with a coldness that made him freeze mid-step. I am a forensic accountant, Dad. I reminded him, my words sharp, precise, and devoid of any emotional fragility. I do not deal in feelings. I do not deal in gossip. I deal in paper trails, bank routing numbers, and federal tax identification codes. You want to talk about baseless accusations? Let us talk about the hard data inside this folder. Let us talk about the exact sum of money your pristine, successful daughter used to buy my husband. Imani finally found her voice. She stepped out from behind my mother, her eyes wide with a desperate, manic energy. She is faking it, Dad, Imani cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me. She printed out fake documents to frame me because she is jealous. She has always been jealous of me and Liam. She cannot stand that I have a wealthy, happy marriage, while she could not even keep a broke loser like Marcus from walking out the door. She paid him to come here and say these things. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. When you hold the absolute truth in your hands, you do not need to shout to be heard. I simply opened the folder, flipped past the summary pages, and pulled out the undeniable proof that was about to burn her entire carefully curated life to the ground. My parents were still talking, their voices a desperate cacophony of denial and status preservation, but their words dissolved into white noise. I did not care about the country club or Liam's executive connections. I cared about the cold, hard numbers. I reached into the manila folder Marcus had handed me and pulled out a stack of high-resolution prints. The top document was a certified wire transfer log obtained directly from the bank's fraud investigation unit. I stepped forward and slammed the paper down onto the glass coffee table right in front of where my mother and sister were sitting. The slap of the paper against the glass echoed through the waiting room, finally cutting off my father's tirade. Take a good look, I commanded, my voice projecting an icy authority that left no room for interruption. Exactly 14 months ago, Marcus received a wire transfer in the exact amount of $82,500. The funds were deposited directly into a hidden offshore account that he opened just 3 days prior to the transfer. My mother squinted at the paper, her brow furrowing, as she tried to comprehend the columns of financial data. My father crossed his arms, stubbornly looking away, but his eyes kept darting back to the highlighted transaction. $82,500 is not a random number. I continued, pacing slowly in front of them like a prosecutor addressing a hostile jury. It is a highly specific and calculated payout. I spent the last 3 weeks utilizing my firm's advanced forensic software to trace the origin of that wire. The money did not come from a personal checking account. It was routed through 3 different banks before landing in Marcus's hands. It originated from a limited liability company named Crescent Holdings. Imani's breath hitched. I saw the exact second her heart plummeted into her stomach. Crescent Holdings. I repeated, making sure the name hung heavily in the clinical air of the hospital. Does that ring a bell for anyone? It should. I traced the incorporation documents filed with the state of Georgia. Crescent Holdings is a shell company. It produces no goods, offers no services, and employs 0 actual staff. It exists solely to move money quietly. And the registered agent who signed the incorporation papers using her maiden name is Imani Dubois. Liar, Imani shrieked. The word tore from her throat raw and panicked. She lunged forward, her manicured nails scraping against the glass table as she snatched the wire transfer log. She crumpled the thick paper in her fists, tearing it down the middle with frantic, desperate energy. You hacked into a database and printed out garbage, she yelled, tossing the ripped pieces onto the floor. You are a sick and jealous woman trying to frame me because your husband found someone better. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just reached back into my folder and pulled out 3 more identical certified copies of the exact same wire transfer log. I tossed the first one onto my father's chest. He reflexively caught it. I dropped the second one into my mother's lap. I held the third one up right in front of Imani's pale, sweating face. Tear that one up too, I suggested calmly. I have digital backups on 3 separate encrypted servers, a physical copy filed with my lead partner at the accounting firm, and another set sitting on the desk of the federal investigator currently handling the subpoena. You can rip up all the paper you want, Imani, but you cannot shred a digital footprint. The money came from your shell company. The IP addresses authorizing the transfers trace directly back to the secure wireless network in your Buckhead penthouse. My parents stared at the documents in their hands. The denial they had clung to so fiercely was beginning to fracture. I made sure to walk them through every damning detail. I pointed to the specific lines on the paper my father was holding. Look at the timestamp, Dad, I instructed. The wire transfer was initiated on October 12th at 4:15 in the afternoon. Do you remember what happened on October 12th? We were all at your house for Sunday dinner. Marcus was sitting on the patio drinking a beer with Liam, and Imani excused herself to the guest bedroom claiming she had a migraine. She was not resting. She was authorizing the financial transaction that bought my husband's betrayal. My father swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the numbers. The reality was staring him in the face. Beatrice. My mother was shaking her head slowly, murmuring that there must be a mistake, that someone must have stolen Imani's identity. Nobody stole her identity, Mom, I countered sharply. The secondary authentication for the wire transfer was approved via a biometric scan on a smartphone registered to Imani's personal cellular plan. To move that much liquidity, she had to verify it with her own fingerprint. The bank records prove it. The telecom records prove it. The timeline proves it. She bought my husband for $82,500 and handed him a script to destroy my life because she could not stand the thought of me being happy. Imani backed away, bumping into the wall. Her chest heaved as she struggled to draw breath. She looked like a trapped animal. The arrogant, untouchable golden child of the black elite was gone. In her place was a white-collar criminal whose entire web of deceit had just been unraveled by the very sister she tried to ruin. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice echoing from the doorway where he still stood. "She threatened me," he said, addressing my parents directly now. "I told her no at first. I told her I could not do it to Zuri. But she dug into my past. She found out about the offshore betting debt I was hiding. She told me if I did not take the money and leave Zuri exactly the way she instructed, she would send the debt collectors to my firm and have me disbarred from the financial sector entirely. She blackmailed me into taking the bribe." The undeniable proof was on the table in my parents' hands and echoing from Marcus's mouth. There was no more room for gaslighting. There was no more room for alternate realities. The shell company was real. The money was real. The malicious sociopathic intent to break me was entirely real. I did not stop there. I needed everyone in that room to understand the absolute depravity of what my sister had done. I needed them to see the ugly, twisted motive behind her meticulously crafted facade. I turned to my parents, my voice steady and completely devoid of the hysteria they were trying to project onto me. "Why $82,500? I asked, letting the question hang heavily in the air. Why that specific amount? It was not a random number. It was exactly enough to cover the remainder of Marcus's offshore debts, clear the balance on his luxury car lease, and provide a comfortable cushion for him to disappear. But the more important question is why she did it at all. Why would a woman who supposedly had everything risk federal fraud charges to destroy her sister's marriage?" My parents exchanged a nervous glance. Imani was still backed against the wall, her breathing shallow and ragged. I stepped closer to her, ensuring she could not look away from me. 14 months ago, I was promoted to director at my firm. I stated my words precise and unyielding. It was the largest promotion in the history of our division. I secured a compensation package that for the first time in our lives put my base salary significantly higher than Imani's. At the exact same time, Marcus had finally landed a major account at his brokerage firm. We were doing well. We were happy. We were finally building the kind of stability that did not require country club memberships or fake smiles to maintain. I watched Imani's face contort, a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred breaking through her panic. "You could not stand it, could you?" I pushed further, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You could not stand the thought that the scapegoat sister, the one you and Mom spent 32 years tearing down, was actually succeeding on her own merits. You realized I was no longer the flawed, struggling sibling you could use to make yourself feel superior. You saw me building a life that was genuinely happy, and it terrified you. Your entire identity is wrapped up in being the golden child, the elite success story. If I succeeded, if I surpassed you, what did that make you? Just another woman in Buckhead living off her husband's money." Imani lunged forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Shut up!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You are psychotic. The money was a loan. He came to me begging for help because he was drowning in debt, and you were too focused on your precious promotion to notice. I loaned him the money to save your pathetic marriage, and he took it and ran." She turned to our parents, her eyes wide with manufactured desperation. "Mom, Dad, you have to believe me. He extorted me. He told me if I did not help him pay off his gambling debts, he would drag our family's name through the mud. I was trying to protect Zuri. It was a brilliant pivot, a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. She was instantly trying to reframe her financial crime as an act of familial devotion. My mother immediately seized the lifeline. "You see," Zuri Beatrice gasped, rushing to Imani's side and wrapping a protective arm around her. "Your sister was trying to save you from this monster. She sacrificed her own savings to protect your marriage, and this is how you repay her." My father nodded vigorously, his relief palpable. "That explains the shell company," Calvin declared, his voice regaining its usual booming authority. "She had to use an LLC to protect Liam's assets from being tied to Marcus's illegal gambling debts. It was a protective measure. Imani is a victim here, Zuri. You should be apologizing to her for jumping to such malicious conclusions." I almost laughed. The speed with which they constructed a new comfortable reality to protect the golden child was staggering. But I did not need to dismantle their delusion. Marcus did it for me. Alone. Marcus repeated, his voice filled with a bitter, hollow amusement. He stepped away from the door, pulling his phone from his pocket. He did not look like a man who had extorted anyone. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose, if it was alone. Imani, Marcus said, his thumb swiping across his phone screen. Why did you send me this text message on October 14th, 2 days after the wire transfer cleared? Imani froze, her mother's arms still wrapped around her. Marcus held his phone up the screen, glowing brightly in the dim hospital light, and began to read aloud. The funds are secured. You have 48 hours to file the divorce papers. Make sure you use Chloe's name when you tell Calvin and Beatrice. I want her completely isolated. If you deviate from the script, I will contact the partners at your firm and provide them with the documentation of the DUIs you expunged last year. Take the money and destroy her, or I will destroy you. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no spinning that. There was no protective narrative that could explain away the sheer calculated venom of those words. The text message was not a request for repayment. It was a hostage negotiation. It was an execution order. My mother's arm slowly dropped from Imani's shoulder. She took a half step back, her eyes wide with shock. My father stared at Marcus's phone as if it were a venomous snake. The undeniable reality of Imani's sociopathic cruelty was laid bare in the sterile hospital waiting room. She had not tried to save my marriage. She had orchestrated its violent public execution, and she had done it simply because she could not tolerate my success. I looked at my parents, watching the cognitive dissonance short-circuit their brains. They had spent their entire lives treating Imani like a queen, excusing her flaws, and propping up her ego at my expense. Now they were staring at the monster they had created. The silence in the waiting room stretched into a suffocating vacuum. The text message read by Marcus hung in the air, an undeniable testament to the rot at the core of my sister. I watched my father, Calvin. I watched the cognitive wheels turning behind his eyes. Any normal parent would have collapsed under the weight of such a revelation. Any normal father would have turned to the daughter who had been maliciously broken and dropped to his knees in apologies. But Calvin was not processing grief. He was processing risk. The shock on his face rapidly hardened into a cold, calculating mask. He looked at Imani, then at Marcus, and finally his gaze locked onto the manila folder in my hands. "Give me the folder, Zuri," my father demanded. His voice was no longer loud. It was a terrifyingly calm, authoritative bark, the exact tone he used when closing a hostile real estate deal or silencing a waiter at a 5-star restaurant. He took a deliberate step toward me and extended his hand, palm up, expecting absolute obedience. "Hand over every single copy of those wire transfers and the bank logs right now. We are going to find a shredder, and we are going to turn this entire mess into confetti." I stared at his outstretched hand. For a fraction of a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "Shred the documents," I repeated, testing the words on my tongue to see if they made any more sense spoken aloud. "You want me to destroy the forensic evidence that proves my sister paid my husband to abandon me?" My father did not flinch. "Yes," he stated without a single ounce of shame. "It has been a year, Zuri. Look at you. You are fine. You survived the divorce. You got your massive promotion at the accounting firm. You have a beautiful apartment and a thriving career. You are standing here right now, proving that you are the strongest person in this family. You made it through the fire, but Imani will not survive this. If you do not destroy those papers, you are going to ruin her entire life over a petty grudge." A petty grudge. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. He was reducing a year of therapy, sleepless nights, and devastating public humiliation to a minor inconvenience. I looked over at my mother, Beatrice. She was no longer clutching her chest in shock. She had seamlessly transitioned into survival mode right alongside my father. She nodded vigorously in agreement with him, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway, as if expecting Liam to walk around the corner at any given second. "Your father is right," Beatrice urged, stepping closer to me and lowering her voice to a frantic whisper. Think about the bigger picture, Zuri. If Liam finds out that Imani has been operating a shell company to move tens of thousands of dollars behind his back, he will divorce her immediately. You know how Liam is about his finances. He is a ruthless investor. He will not just leave her, he will crush her in court. She signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement. She will walk away with absolutely nothing. She will be destitute. And that is her problem, I replied, my voice dropping to a glacial temperature. She committed a federal financial crime to destroy my marriage. Why on earth should I care if her own marriage implodes as a direct result of her sociopathic choices? Because it does not just affect her. Calvin hissed, his patience snapping. He stepped so close to me I could smell the expensive scotch he had been drinking before they came to the hospital. If Liam divorces Imani over financial fraud, the scandal will rip through Atlanta like wildfire. Liam is not just a wealthy man, he is the key to our entire social standing. Because of his connections, your mother and I were finally invited to join the Buckhead Country Club last month. We are currently being vetted for the executive board of the Heritage Foundation. Do you have any idea how hard we have worked to secure our place in the black elite of this city? If Liam casts Imani out, we lose our access. We lose our invitations. We lose our standing. We will be laughingstocks. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer audacity of his confession wash over me. The puzzle pieces finally snapped together, revealing a picture so ugly it defied comprehension. This was never about protecting Imani because they loved her. This was about protecting their social currency. I had spent 32 years wondering why I was never enough for them, wondering why I was always the scapegoat while Imani was paraded around on a pedestal. The answer was standing right in front of me, reeking of expensive cologne and misplaced arrogance. They did not value character. They valued country club memberships. They valued charity galas and luxury yachts. They were looking at the daughter who had been systemically targeted and broken, and they were actively demanding that I swallow my trauma so they could keep playing golf with millionaires. You want me to protect your country club membership? I asked, articulating every syllable with deliberate precision. My husband left me. My best friend was used as a prop to humiliate me. I lost my entire social circle because of the lies Imani paid Marcus to spread. And your biggest concern in this moment is whether you will still get invited to the Heritage Foundation Gala next spring. You have to take the high road, Beatrice pleaded, her voice taking on a whining, manipulative pitch. You have always been the sensible one, Zuri. You do not need a man like Marcus anyway. We are actually doing you a favor by getting him out of your life. Imani needs Liam. Her whole identity is tied to that marriage and the status it brings. You are smart enough to stand on your own 2 feet. Do the right thing for your family. Let Marcus walk away today and throw those papers in the trash. We will even pay you the $82,000 back over time, if that is what it takes to make this go away. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally at Imani, who was watching me with a pathetic glimmer of hope in her eyes. They genuinely believed I would fold. They had spent my entire life conditioning me to accept the bare minimum, training me to sacrifice my own boundaries to keep the peace. They thought I was still that same obedient girl who would bleed herself dry to keep them warm. I tightened my grip on the manila folder. I did not scream. I did not cry. The last remnants of daughterly affection I held for Calvin and Beatrice died right there on the sterile linoleum floor of the hospital waiting room. It was not a sudden death, but rather the final expiration of a bond that had been starved of oxygen for 32 years. I looked at the 2 people who had brought me into this world, realizing that they had never viewed me as a daughter. I was a mirror they only looked into when they wanted to see their own flaws projected onto someone else. And now, seeing that I refused to be their scapegoat, the absolute panic set in. My mother saw the absolute stillness in my body. She recognized the terrifying absence of compliance in my eyes. The sheer unadulterated terror of losing her elite social status stripped away her usual polished arrogance, leaving behind a desperate clawing manipulator willing to use any weapon she had left. She lunged forward and grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging painfully through the fabric of my blazer. Beatrice launched her final and most toxic offensive. She did not yell this time. Instead, she collapsed into the role of a devastated, pleading matriarch. Large, glistening tears welled in her eyes and spilled over her carefully powdered cheeks, leaving perfect tracks that did not smudge her makeup. It was a flawless performance, a theatrical display she had practiced over decades of country club luncheons and high society charity galas whenever she needed to extract pity from an audience to get her way. "Zuri, please," my mother sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "Look at me. Look at your mother. You have always been the strong one, Zuri. You have always been the pillar of this family. You do not need a husband like Marcus anyway. You never did. You are brilliant. You are successful. You have the grit to survive any scandal. But Imani is different. You know how fragile she is underneath it all. Imani needs Liam. Her whole identity is tied to that marriage and the life he provides for her. She cannot survive the humiliation of being cast out of Buckhead society. She has nothing else to fall back on. Please, I am begging you as your mother. Take the high road. Forgive your sister and let Marcus walk away. Slide that folder into your briefcase before Liam turns around. We will pay you back. We will do whatever it takes. Do it for the family." I stared down at the woman who gave birth to me, watching her weaponize my own resilience against me. For my entire life, I had agonized over why I was never enough. I had spent countless nights wondering why Imani was showered with praise, while my hard-earned promotions were met with a dismissive nod. In that exact moment, the devastating truth clicked into place. They did not favor Imani because she was superior. They favored her because she was entirely hollow. My mother was explicitly admitting that Imani possessed no actual substance, and to prop up her massive but brittle ego, I was expected to be the sacrificial lamb. In our culture, being labeled the strong black woman is too often a life sentence of carrying everyone else's burdens. My mother was using that toxic trope to chain me to the floor of a burning building so her golden child could escape. I reached down with my free hand and peeled my mother's fingers off my arm, bending them back just hard enough to make her gasp and let go. I did not pull away quickly. I moved with deliberate, terrifying slowness, severing the physical connection between us forever. My voice did not shake. It did not rise. It dropped into a lethal, quiet calm that forced them to lean in to hear their own execution. "You want me to swallow the humiliation of a fake cheating scandal so you can keep sipping champagne on Liam's dime?" I asked, articulating every syllable with the precision of a scalpel. "You actually thought you could appeal to my sense of family loyalty after spending 3 decades proving that loyalty only flows in one direction. You watched me lose my best friend and my husband in the same week. You sat at my dining room table and watched me suffer knowing your other daughter paid for my execution. And you let her do it because I was strong enough to survive the abuse and she was too weak to earn her own success." Calvin opened his mouth to issue another desperate command, likely another threat about family legacy, but I cut him off instantly. "I am a forensic accountant, Dad." I stated the title hanging in the air like a loaded weapon. "Do you really think I stopped auditing when I found the $82,500? Do you honestly believe I saw a massive unauthorized wire transfer initiated by my own sister, patted myself on the back and closed my laptop? When I find a rat, I do not just trap it, I tear up the floorboards to find the entire nest." My father's jaw snapped shut. The residual anger in his eyes was rapidly being swallowed by a new suffocating wave of terror. He was a businessman. He understood the implications of a deep audit. He knew that when someone started pulling at the threads of a shell company, the entire sweater unraveled. "I audited the entire shell company," I whispered, stepping closer, invading their physical space. "I pulled the incorporation documents, the tax returns, the bank statements, and the routing numbers. I tracked every single penny that went in and every single penny that went out over a 3-year period. And there is no fixing what I found on page 42 of the master ledger. The color left my mother's face entirely. She looked like a ghost draped in designer silk. She reached out blindly, grabbing the back of a hospital chair to keep her knees from buckling. "I found the consulting fees," I said softly, delivering the fatal blow. "I found the recurring monthly transfers of $15,000. I found the secondary bank account registered to a boutique consulting firm named Dubois Strategies, a firm owned jointly by Calvin and Beatrice Dubois, a firm that has 0 clients, 0 public footprint, and 0 legitimate revenue streams. But somehow that phantom firm has been receiving steady, massive payouts from Crescent Holdings for the last 36 months." My father stopped breathing. He stood paralyzed, his eyes wide and unblinking. The realization crashed down on him with the force of an oncoming train. I was not just exposing Amani's cruelty. I was exposing his complicity. "You did not just know about her shell company," I continued, twisting the metaphorical knife with surgical precision. "You were on the payroll. You funded your entire Black elite lifestyle with stolen money. The down payment on the new Porsche, the initiation fees for the Buckhead Country Club. It was all paid for by the same illicit funds Imani used to buy my husband. You are not just terrible parents protecting a toxic daughter. You are co-conspirators in a massive federal embezzlement scheme." "Zuri, please." My father finally choked out, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. It was a completely pathetic, broken sound. "We had debts. The market turned against me. We did not know she was going to use that same account to pay Marcus. We swear to you. Ignorance of one crime does not grant you immunity from the other, Dad." I smiled, a cold, empty expression. "You took stolen money. You built a fake empire on a foundation of fraud. And you thought I would just take the high road. But you forgot one crucial detail about resilience. It requires knowing exactly who your enemies are and neutralizing them. You are a liability, and I liquidate liabilities." My parents froze. The instinct to protect their favorite daughter warred violently against their instinct for self-preservation. They looked at Imani, who was staring back at them, silently begging for salvation. And then they looked at me, holding the undeniable proof of their federal crimes. They did not say a word to defend her. They simply stepped backward, retreating into the shadows of the waiting room, abandoning Imani to face her executioner alone. They chose their own survival, proving once and for all that their loyalty was entirely transactional. Just then, the heavy glass doors at the end of the corridor slid shut. Footsteps echoed against the polished hospital tile, steady, rhythmic, and completely unaware of the slaughterhouse he was walking into. Liam rounded the corner holding 2 cups of artisanal coffee, his blue eyes scanning the waiting room until they landed on our fractured, trembling group. The preliminary audit was complete. It was time to deliver the final report. "Hey everyone," Liam called out cheerfully, holding up the 2 cups of coffee as he stepped fully into our circle. "Sorry that took so long." The line at the cafe was ridiculous. "Is everything okay in here? The tension feels a little thick." I turned to face my brother-in-law, my posture perfectly straight, the manila folder resting securely in my hands. The preliminary audit was complete. It was time to deliver the final report. Imani did not miss a beat. The sheer instinct for self-preservation kicked in with terrifying speed. Before Liam could even take another step into the room, she launched herself across the polished hospital floor. She did not just walk to him. She collided with his chest, burying her face into the lapels of his custom-tailored suit. A sharp, theatrical sob ripped from her throat. It was a flawless execution of the damsel in distress routine. Liam instinctively shifted the coffee cups to one hand, wrapping his free arm tightly around his trembling wife. His relaxed smile vanished instantly, replaced by the fierce, protective scowl of a man programmed to defend his territory. "Liam," she cried, her voice muffled but perfectly pitched to convey absolute panic. "We have to get out of here right now. Zuri is having a complete mental breakdown. She is completely losing her grip on reality. You know she is still not over her divorce, and now she brought Marcus here. They are teaming up to extort me. They are demanding money and threatening to ruin my reputation if I do not pay them." Please, Liam, take me home. I cannot be around this toxicity. She is dangerous. Liam stared over the top of Imani's head, his blue eyes locking onto me. The polite brother-in-law I had known for the past 4 years was completely gone. In his place stood a high-powered financial investor who was used to crushing threats before breakfast. He looked at the manila folder in my hands, then shifted his gaze to Marcus, who was standing a few feet away, looking like a cornered thief. Finally, Liam looked at my parents, Calvin and Beatrice, who were cowering in the shadows exactly as I had commanded them to do. Their silence only validated Imani's desperate narrative. To Liam, it looked exactly like an unhinged sister orchestrating a shakedown, while the loving parents stood by, paralyzed by the sudden violence of the situation. Zuri, Liam said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding register. I am going to ask you to step back. Right now. I know you have had a tremendously difficult year. I know Marcus leaving you was a massive blow to your mental health. But coming to a hospital while your aunt is in surgery and ambushing your sister with your ex-husband is completely unacceptable. I do not know what kind of shakedown you two are attempting to run here, but I will not allow you to harass my wife. If you need financial help, there are appropriate ways to ask. Extortion is not one of them. Back off before I call hospital security and have you both escorted off the premises. I stood perfectly still. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush to defend myself against the accusations of extortion or mental instability. I simply watched them. I watched Liam stroke Imani's hair, whispering soothing words to the woman who had spent the last 3 years systematically funneling his wealth into a phantom consulting firm. I felt a brief, fleeting moment of genuine pity for him. Liam was a smart man. He managed billion-dollar portfolios. He sat on corporate boards and evaluated risk for a living. Yet he was completely blind to the parasite attached to his own chest. Imani had played him beautifully. She had convinced him that her family was a chaotic, emotionally unstable mess, positioning herself as the sole beacon of grace and success. She had prepped the battlefield for this exact moment, ensuring that if I ever tried to speak the truth, I would look like a jealous, deranged woman trying to tear down her perfect life. Imani turned her head slightly, keeping her face pressed against Liam's chest, but angling her eyes so she could look directly at me. She shot me a look of pure, concentrated venom. It was a silent challenge. She was daring me to speak. She genuinely believed that Liam's protective rage would shield her from the forensic evidence I held in my hands. She thought his wealth and his power would automatically invalidate my data. She thought she had won. I took a deep, steadying breath. I let go of every single familial tie I had left. I stopped looking at Liam as my brother-in-law and started looking at him as a victim of financial fraud. I tucked the manila folder under my arm and reached into my briefcase, pulling out a sleek silver iPad. I had loaded the entire digital audit onto this device, organizing the transactions and incorporation documents into a presentation that any corporate board member would instantly understand. Liam, I am not here to extort your wife, I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clear authority. I do not want a single cent of your money. And despite what Imani is whispering into your ear right now, my mental health is in perfect condition. I am not speaking to you as a bitter sister. I am speaking to you in my official capacity as a certified forensic accountant. Liam's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, shielding Imani behind his body. I honestly do not care what your job title is right now, Zuri. You need to leave. You are upsetting Imani, and I am not going to stand here and listen to whatever fabricated conspiracy you have cooked up with Marcus. I did not retreat. I closed the physical distance between us, moving with a calm, undeniable purpose that made Liam hesitate. I held the iPad out the screen, glowing brightly with the first page of the Crescent Holdings executive summary. I bypassed the emotional noise completely. Take the tablet, Liam, I instructed quietly. Take it right now and look closely at the exact source of the stolen funds. Because the money Imani used to buy my husband's exit was pulled directly from the irrevocable education trust you set up for your future children. Liam froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The protective grip he had on Imani loosened just a fraction of an inch. But in that tiny physical shift, the entire dynamic of the room fractured completely. He looked down at the silver iPad I was holding out to him. The screen was illuminated with the stark, undeniable architecture of a bank statement. Imani lunged for the device. "Do not look at that!" She shrieked, her hands clawing desperately at the air between us. "Liam, it is a virus. It is a fake document she mocked up to poison your mind. Throw it away." He did not throw it away. The financier inside him, the man who scrutinized balance sheets and managed billions in assets for a living, had been triggered. You cannot tell a man of his caliber that his secured trusts have been breached and expect him to simply walk away. He gently but firmly caught Imani by the wrists, moving her hands away from the screen. "Let me see it," he commanded. His voice was no longer the soothing tone of a comforting husband. It was the absolute unyielding baritone of a CEO demanding an audit report. I handed him the tablet. I did not blink, and I did not gloat. I maintained the exact same professional composure I used when presenting findings to a federal grand jury. "Swipe to the second page," I instructed smoothly. "You will see the original trust charter you signed 3 years ago, the one designated specifically for your future offspring. Look at the authorized withdrawal clause. It requires dual signature authentication for any transfer exceeding $10,000. Liam swiped the screen. His eyes darted back and forth as he scanned the text he knew intimately because he had drafted it himself. "Now, swipe to page 3. I continued, keeping the pace relentless. "That is the wire authorization form submitted on October 10th. The signature on the left is yours. Or rather, it is a highly sophisticated digital replication of your signature mapped directly from a document file you used to close a commercial real estate deal the previous month. The signature on the right belongs to the registered agent of Crescent Holdings, your wife." He gave me permission, Imani blurted out, her lie changing mid-air as the denial fell apart. She grabbed at Liam's sleeve, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the expensive wool. "Liam, remember, I told you I needed to make an investment. A quiet investment for us. I was trying to grow our portfolio." Liam did not look at her. His eyes remained locked on the glowing screen. "You bypassed the biometric security protocol," he murmured, speaking more to himself than to us. The realization was hitting him in real time. "I have token alerts set up for the education trust. Any movement of funds generates a push notification to my primary device. Unless the person initiating the transfer has access to your physical phone," I clarified coldly, driving the final nail into the coffin. "Unless they wait until you are asleep. Unlock your device using your passcode. Authorize the dual-factor authentication token, and then delete the push notification from your screen before you wake up." A stranger could not do that, Liam. A hacker in a foreign country could not do that. Only someone sharing your bed could execute that specific sequence of security breaches. My parents stood paralyzed in the shadows of the waiting room. Marcus watched in stunned silence, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of the monster he had climbed into bed with. He had thought he was taking petty cash. He had no idea he was an accessory to defrauding a major financial investor's family trust. Liam's breathing slowed. The color drained from his face, replaced by a terrifying pale stillness. He tapped the screen, magnifying the routing numbers. He was tracing the money exactly as I had done. He saw the funds leave the sacred account he had built for his unborn children. "Look at the routing sequence on page 4. I guided him, refusing to let the momentum drop. "The capital did not just jump from your trust to Marcus. It was laundered through a series of micro-transactions to avoid triggering federal reporting thresholds. Transactions of $9,000 repeated over a span of 48 hours, consolidating in a Cayman proxy account before hitting Crescent Holdings. That is not a spontaneous loan. That is premeditated wire fraud." Imani dropped to her knees right there on the hospital floor. It was a pathetic theatrical display, her designer dress pooling around her on the sterile linoleum, but Liam did not even glance downward. She grabbed the hem of his trousers. "It was for us." Imani sobbed, her voice echoing with manufactured hysteria. "Zuri was out of control. Marcus came to me and threatened to drag our family name through the dirt. He was going to leak terrible things to the press about you, Liam. I paid him to go away. I used the trust money because I had to act fast to protect you. I was protecting our elite status. Stop lying, I commanded, my voice slicing through her manufactured tears with absolute authority. You did not protect anyone. You weaponized his wealth. You used the money he set aside for the children you claim you want to have with him, and you handed it to a degenerate gambler just to ensure I would be sitting at the Thanksgiving table alone. You robbed your own future to destroy mine. Liam finally lowered the iPad. The man who looked up from that screen was a complete stranger. The warm, affectionate brother-in-law I had known for 4 years was dead and buried. In his place was an apex predator who had just discovered a parasite feeding on his lifeblood. He looked at the hard data, recognizing the undeniable reality that the woman he loved was a financial criminal who viewed his assets as a personal slush fund for her psychological warfare. He slowly looked down at the woman weeping at his feet. He did not reach down to help her up. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He just stared at her with a look of absolute profound revulsion. The illusion of the perfect black elite marriage shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of our eyes. Imani scrambled up from the linoleum floor. The Weeping Victim Act had failed to produce the desired result, so she instantly switched back to aggressive denial. She lunged for the silver tablet again, her hands swiping wildly at the air. Liam stepped back with the effortless grace of a man accustomed to dodging much larger threats. He held the device high out of her reach. Zuri hired someone to build this, Imani screamed, her voice echoing shrilly down the corridor. She is a forensic accountant, Liam. She knows how to manipulate ledgers. She probably hired a dark web hacker to infiltrate your accounts and plant those transaction records to frame me. You know how bitter she is. You know how much she hates us. Liam did not raise his voice to match hers. He did not need to. He simply looked at the screen, his thumb swiping steadily downward as he absorbed the financial architecture of her betrayal. He was no longer looking at his wife. He was looking at a hostile corporate takeover unfolding inside his own home. If this is a fabricated document, Imani, Liam said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly level cadence, then explain to me why the routing number for the Cayman proxy account matches the exact routing number of the offshore vendor you suggested we use for the architectural redesign of the penthouse last year. Imani froze. Her mouth opened, but the frantic stream of denials suddenly evaporated. Liam took another step back, creating a physical barrier of cold professional distance between them. He tapped the screen again. The transaction IDs logged here correspond perfectly with the dates you insisted on handling the monthly reconciliation for the Education Trust. You told me you wanted to be more involved in our wealth management. You said you wanted to learn the process so we could be true partners. I did want to be partners, Imani pleaded, taking a desperate step forward. I was trying to learn, Liam. I swear to you. I only wanted to help us grow. Liam held up a single hand, stopping her in her tracks. A true partner does not set up a limited liability company using a maiden name. What is the employer identification number for Crescent Holdings, Imani? Explain the tax structure you used for this entity. She stared at him blankly, her jaw trembling. What is the employer identification number? Liam repeated, his tone sharpening into a weapon. If this is a legitimate investment vehicle, as you claimed 5 minutes ago, you should know the EIN by heart. Who is the registered agent of the Cayman proxy? What is the exact sequence of the dual-factor authentication token you used to bypass the security protocol on October 10th? Tell me how you bypassed the encrypted firewall I had installed last summer. I do not know. Imani stammered, her hands shaking violently. I do not remember the numbers. Liam, you are confusing me. You are letting her confuse you. This is a setup. You do not know because you did not build the proxy network yourself. Liam deduced, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the data in real time. You are not smart enough to code a multi-tiered laundering sequence. You paid someone to set this up for you. Who did you hire, Imani? Who else has access to the internal security architecture of my family trust? Nobody! Imani cried out, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. I did not hire anyone. It was just me. I figured it out online. I watched tutorials. I just wanted to protect us from Marcus. So you admit you initiated the wire transfer, Liam stated smoothly, snapping the trap shut with the precision of a seasoned litigator. You admit you unlocked my personal phone while I was sleeping, authorized a withdrawal of $82,500 from our unborn children's education fund, and routed it to a man who was actively extorting you. Imani gasped, realizing she had just confessed to the very crime she had spent the last 10 minutes denying. She looked at our parents silently, begging Calvin and Beatrice to intervene, but they remained firmly pressed against the far wall of the waiting room. They recognized the lethal shift in Liam's demeanor. They knew that anyone who stepped between the investor and his missing capital would be slaughtered. Liam lowered the iPad, his blue eyes turning to absolute ice. For 3 years, I trusted you with unrestricted access to our primary accounts. I gave you the security codes because you were my wife. I believed you when you said you were building a charitable foundation. I believed you when you said you needed capital to manage the philanthropic events for the Heritage Foundation. He turned the screen around, forcing her to look at the highlighted rows of data. This is not an emotional mistake, Imani. This is not a panicked reaction to a sudden extortion threat. This is a sustained, calculated parasitic drain on my assets. You did not just steal from me once. You mapped my security protocols. You monitored my sleep schedule so you could access my devices undetected. You engineered a financial backdoor into my life. Liam, please, Imani begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic broken whisper. I love you. You are my whole world. Do not look at me like this. Please just listen to me. Liam stared at her as if she were a stranger. You are a financial predator, he said, the words falling like heavy stones onto the hospital floor. You weaponized the trust I had for you to fund a vendetta against your own sister. You looked me in the eye every single morning, kissed me, and then quietly siphoned my wealth to pay a man to destroy a marriage. He shook his head slowly, a grim, humorless smile touching the corner of his mouth. The sheer audacity of it is almost impressive, but it is also incredibly sloppy. You left the digital equivalent of a blazing neon sign pointing directly to your primary residence. You thought because I loved you I would never audit you. You thought your status as my wife made you immune to accountability. You thought I would simply pay the bills and ask no questions while you played the perfect high society wife. Imani reached out to grab his hand, but Liam pulled away so sharply she stumbled forward. Do not touch me, he commanded. His voice was completely devoid of anger now. It was entirely transactional. It was the sound of a man cutting his losses and liquidating a toxic asset. He turned to me, handing the iPad back with a short, respectful nod. Your forensic work is impeccable, Zuri. The routing sequence is undeniable. The timestamp correlations with my own device logs remove any shadow of a doubt. You have my gratitude for bringing this to my attention before she could bleed the secondary trusts dry. I took the tablet, maintaining my professional stance. I appreciate your objectivity, Liam. The data speaks for itself. It usually does when people try to hide their sins in the ledgers. It certainly does, Liam agreed. He turned his attention back to his wife, who was now weeping openly, her flawless facade completely obliterated. He did not see the beautiful, charming socialite he had married. He saw a liability that needed to be aggressively neutralized. The transition was terrifying to witness. He pulled his mobile phone from his inside jacket pocket, unlocking the screen with a swift, decisive motion. He was no longer operating as a betrayed husband. He was operating as a chief executive officer, eliminating a catastrophic internal threat. He did not yell. He did not demand apologies. He simply prepared to execute a flawless financial severing. Liam held his mobile phone in his right hand, his thumb hovering over the contact for his primary wealth manager. He was seconds away from initiating the asset freeze that would lock Imani out of his entire financial ecosystem. But before he could tap the screen and initiate the call, I stepped forward and tapped the glass of the iPad he was still clutching in his left hand. Do not make that call just yet, Liam, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the hospital waiting room. You are treating this like a single breach of security. You are operating under the assumption that Marcus was the only unauthorized beneficiary of your family trust. But a forensic audit never stops at the first anomaly. Keep scrolling, Liam. Go to the Master Ledger tab at the bottom of the screen. Liam paused. The absolute certainty in my tone made him look down. He tapped the tab I indicated, bringing up a dense spreadsheet filled with hundreds of line items spanning the entire 3 years of his marriage to my sister. The $82,500 was just a one-time transaction, I explained, walking him through the data exactly as I would a corporate client who had just discovered an internal embezzlement ring. It was a panic move, a sloppy, desperate lump sum meant to eliminate an immediate threat. But financial predators rarely survive on panic moves alone. They survive on sustained systemic draining. Look at column D. Notice the recurring monthly transfers of $15,000. Liam scrolled down the page. The blue light from the tablet illuminated the harsh, sharp angles of his face as his eyes tracked the repetitive outbound wires. Every single month, on the first day of the month, exactly $15,000 vanished from his secondary investment accounts. The funds were labeled with a vague, highly generic description: consulting fees. Liam read aloud, his voice dangerously low. He looked up at Imani, who was still kneeling on the floor, weeping into her hands. You told me you were retaining an independent advisory firm to help manage the charitable donations for the Heritage Foundation. You told me it was a necessary operating expense to maintain our standing in the philanthropic community. She did not hire an advisory firm, Liam, I corrected him, turning my gaze slowly toward the far wall where my parents were attempting to blend into the shadows. She hired her parents. Check the routing numbers attached to those consulting fees. They deposit directly into a business checking account registered to Dubois Strategies. That is a phantom firm owned entirely by Calvin and Beatrice Dubois. The sound that escaped my father's throat was a strangled, pathetic gasp. He took a step backward, his shoulders hitting the hospital wall. My mother covered her face with her designer handbag, trying to shield herself from the sudden, blinding spotlight of accountability. Over the last 3 years, Imani has funneled over $400,000 of your personal wealth to our parents, I stated, ensuring every single syllable echoed down the corridor. She bled your accounts dry so they could buy their Porsches, pay their country club dues, and pretend to be part of Atlanta's black elite. They built an entire kingdom of high society prestige using money stolen directly from your pockets. Liam slowly turned his head to look at my parents. The transition was terrifying. He was no longer just a betrayed husband looking at a deceitful wife. He was an apex predator looking at the parasites that had been feeding on him. He took slow, deliberate steps toward Calvin and Beatrice. Calvin held up his hands in a frantic defensive gesture. Liam, listen to me. My father stammered, the booming, arrogant voice of the family patriarch completely reduced to a pathetic whine. We provided legitimate services. I gave Imani financial advice on real estate markets. I consulted on her charity events. The money was compensation for our time and our expertise. We did not steal anything. You are a failed real estate broker who has not closed a legitimate commercial deal in 5 years. Dad, I interjected, slicing through his lie with absolute precision. I pulled the tax records for Dubois Strategies. You have 0 deliverables. You have 0 generated invoices. You do not even have a functional website or a business email address. You received $400,000 and you produced absolutely nothing in return. It is textbook money laundering. Beatrice dropped her handbag. The clasp hit the linoleum floor with a sharp crack. Liam, you have to understand, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Imani insisted. She told us you wanted to help the family. She said you had so much wealth that you wanted to ensure her parents lived comfortably and maintained a certain standard of living to reflect well on you. We thought you approved the transfers. We thought it was a gift from a generous son-in-law. Do not insult my intelligence, Beatrice. Liam growled, his voice vibrating with a suppressed lethal rage. If it were a gift, it would have been processed through my primary wealth manager as a taxable family disbursement. It would not have been disguised as a corporate consulting fee and routed through a shell company. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew the money was illicit. You sat at my dining room table, drank my wine, slept in the guest house I paid for, and smiled in my face while you actively participated in defrauding me. Liam stopped just a few feet away from them. He looked my father up and down, his eyes scanning the custom-tailored suit Calvin was wearing. A suit undoubtedly paid for by the stolen funds. You stood in this hospital not 10 minutes ago and told Zuri she was a disappointment, Liam said, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. You lectured her about maintaining a high-value marriage. You told her she needed to take the high road to protect this family. You are nothing but common thieves wrapped in expensive fabric. You are high-class beggars living off my hard work because you are completely incapable of generating your own success. My father's jaw tightened. A flash of wounded pride flared in his eyes, but it was immediately extinguished by the terrifying reality of his situation. He was a man who worshipped money and status above all else, and he was currently staring at the man who had the power to strip him of both permanently. I watched my parents crumble. This was the moment I had waited for. This was the ultimate vindication for every single time they had made me feel small, inadequate, and unworthy of their love. They had spent my entire life measuring my worth by my bank account and my social standing. They had discarded me when my marriage failed because I was no longer a useful asset to their elite image. But their entire image was a hallucination. Their superiority was funded by a criminal enterprise orchestrated by their golden child. Beatrice opened her mouth to argue, to deploy another layer of emotional blackmail, but she had absolutely nothing left. The forensic evidence had burned away every single lie, every single manipulation, and every single excuse. They were exposed defenseless, and entirely at the mercy of a man who had just realized his entire marriage was an orchestrated financial heist. Before Liam could say a single word or tap the screen of his phone, Calvin made the single greatest miscalculation of his entire miserable life. His narcissistic pride, bloated by decades of unearned privilege and a desperate need to maintain his patriarchal authority, simply refused to accept the reality of his own destruction. He could not stand being dismissed like an insubordinate employee in front of Marcus, myself, and the passing hospital staff. He adjusted the cuffs of his stolen bespoke suit, straightened his spine, and attempted to summon the booming, commanding voice he had used to dominate our family for as long as I could remember. "Liam, you are speaking out of shock and anger," Calvin stated, forcing a hollow, patronizing chuckle that echoed terribly in the quiet corridor. It was the sound of a man trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. "You are letting Zuri's bitterness and her aggressive accounting tactics cloud your business judgment. We are family. We do not throw around words like embezzlement or fraud. This was an investment. I was investing in the Dubois family legacy, which directly benefits your wife and your future children. The real estate market has been turbulent, and I needed capital to secure our standing. We can sit down with my accountants tomorrow morning, draft the necessary paperwork, and restructure the capital so it reflects properly on your corporate ledgers as a family loan." Liam stopped. He slowly lowered his phone and turned around. The piercing gaze he fixed on my father was entirely devoid of any human warmth or familial affection. It was the look of an apex predator analyzing a particularly foolish prey that had just wandered directly back into the strike zone. The transition of Liam from a betrayed husband to a ruthless billionaire financier was swift, absolute, and terrifying to witness. "I never authorized a single cent. You are thieves." Liam delivered the words with a brutal, crushing finality that sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Calvin's mouth opened, but his vocal cords entirely failed him. "An investment," Liam repeated, stepping directly into Calvin's personal space, using his height to tower over the older man. His voice was surgical and merciless, vibrating with a suppressed, lethal rage. "An investment yields a return. What exactly did my $400,000 yield, Calvin? Did it yield a profitable real estate venture? Did it yield a charitable trust or a diversified portfolio? No. It yielded a down payment on your imported Porsche. It yielded Beatrice's designer wardrobe and her weekly spa treatments. It yielded the $50,000 initiation fees for the Buckhead Country Club. I did not invest in your legacy. I financed your delusions of grandeur. You are a failed real estate broker who has not closed a legitimate commercial deal in 5 years, and you survived by acting as a parasite on my trust funds. My mother let out a sharp, wounded noise, pressing her hands against her cheeks. The mention of her beloved country club struck the exact excruciating nerve Liam intended to hit. Her entire existence, her entire sense of self-worth was predicated on being perceived as a cornerstone of Atlanta's black elite. You have spent years looking down on people. Liam continued, turning his icy glare toward Beatrice, refusing to let her hide. You stood in this hospital not 10 minutes ago and told Zuri she was a disappointment. You lectured her about maintaining a high-value marriage. You told her she needed to take the high road to protect this family. You paraded around this city demanding respect, acting as though you were royalty simply because your daughter shared my bed. But you are nothing but common thieves wrapped in expensive fabric. You are high-class beggars living off my hard work because you are completely incapable of generating your own success. The facade completely disintegrated. The polished, untouchable aura of Calvin and Beatrice Dubois shattered into jagged, irreparable pieces right before my eyes. My father's shoulders slumped forward. The tailored fabric of his expensive suit suddenly hung off him like a cheap Halloween costume. He looked old, frail, and entirely pathetic. He was no longer the imposing patriarch. He was a fraud who had just been stripped naked in public. Beatrice could not handle the exposure. Her vanity buckled under the sheer weight of the humiliation. "Liam, I beg you," she pleaded, her voice reduced to a frantic, wet whisper, as she wept openly, no longer caring about her makeup. "Do not tell the board. If the Heritage Foundation hears about this, they will revoke our membership. We will be ruined. We will lose all our friends. We will have nowhere to go. We will pay you back. We will sell the cars. Just please, I am begging you, keep this quiet." "Your friends," Liam mocked, a dark, humorless smile crossing his face. "Do you mean the judges, the surgeons, and the corporate executives who sit on the foundation board? The people who actually earned their wealth through decades of labor? How do you think they will react when I inform them that their newest peer is a money launderer who funded their philanthropic pledges with money embezzled from an unborn child's education trust? Because I am not just going to tell them, Beatrice, I am going to make sure they see the authenticated bank statements." My mother let out a strangled wail, her knees buckling slightly as she grabbed my father's arm for support. But Calvin was too paralyzed by his own terror to offer her any stability. "I sit on the advisory committee for the Heritage Foundation," Liam reminded them, twisting the knife with absolute precision. "My firm is their largest corporate sponsor. When I call the board president tomorrow morning, you will not just be asked to leave. You will be excommunicated. You will be toxic. Nobody in this city will ever return your phone calls again. You are finished." Liam did not wait for my parents to offer another pathetic excuse. He had delivered the emotional and social executions flawlessly. He turned his back on them for the final time, completely dismissing their existence as if they were trash swept into the gutter. He walked back to the center of the room, standing over Imani, who was still weeping on the floor. He pulled his mobile phone back up, unlocking the screen with a swift, decisive motion. He did not pace. He did not shake. He stood with the absolute terrifying stillness of a man about to obliterate an empire. The preliminary teardown was finished. It was time to initiate the financial apocalypse. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Jonathan Hayes, Private Wealth Division. How can I help you, Mr. Sterling?" Liam's voice was a low, mechanical hum. "Jonathan, authenticate authorization code Delta 907 Bravo. Initiate a total lockdown protocol on all secondary and joint asset portfolios immediately." Imani gasped, a wet, ragged sound that echoed off the linoleum floor. She knew exactly who Jonathan was. She had sipped mimosas with him at charity brunches, laughing and pretending she understood the complex portfolios he managed for her husband. Now that same man was dismantling her entire life. She crawled forward, her hands grasping desperately at Liam's ankles. "Liam, no, please. Stop. Hang up the phone." Liam did not even look down. He simply shifted his stance, stepping out of her grasp as if avoiding a puddle of dirty water. Jonathan Liam continued, completely talking over his wife's shrieks. "I have identified a massive internal breach. Freeze the primary joint checking account. Freeze the secondary investment accounts. Cancel the black card ending in 4201 and the platinum card ending in 8895. Flag all recent transactions as fraudulent. Understood, Mr. Sterling. Jonathan replied smoothly, the sound of rapid keystrokes clicking through the speaker. The freeze is active. Credit lines are terminated. Do you require me to dispatch the internal fraud investigation team? Not yet, Liam replied. Right now, I need you to conference in David from the legal department. Imani was literally on the floor, sobbing, her perfectly styled hair falling in unkempt strands across her face. I will pay it back, she wailed, pounding her fists against the hospital floor. Mom and Dad will sell the house. They will sell the cars. We will give you every penny back. Just do not take my cards. Liam, please. I have nothing else. I need those accounts. The charity gala is next week. I am the co-chair. How am I supposed to explain this? As a forensic accountant, I had witnessed hostile corporate takeovers. I had sat in rooms during federal raids. But I had never seen a man liquidate his own marriage with such terrifying efficiency. I watched my sister hyperventilating on the floor, and the absolute sickness of her delusion was on full display. She had just been caught stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. She had destroyed her sister's marriage, and her biggest concern was how she was going to pay for her country club charity gala. She was not apologizing for ruining a life. She was mourning the loss of her unlimited credit limit. A new voice joined the speakerphone. David speaking. Liam, what is the emergency? David, Liam said, his voice entirely stripped of humanity. I need you to pull my prenuptial agreement. Navigate to Section 4, Paragraph B, the Severe Financial Misconduct and Fraud Penalty Clause. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard over the speaker. I have it, David confirmed. Activating this clause requires undeniable proof of malicious financial diversion exceeding $50,000. Liam glanced at me. I have forensic proof of over $480,000 in diverted funds authenticated by a certified forensic accountant. I am activating the clause right now. Understood, David replied, shifting into a strictly legal cadence. For the record, the clause dictates that upon activation due to proven fraud, all spousal support obligations are immediately nullified. The offending party forfeits all claims to marital property, real estate, and liquid assets. They are entitled to zero alimony and zero settlement payouts. No, Imani screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched guttural shriek. You cannot do this to me. I am your wife. You promised to take care of me. Liam ignored her completely. Draft the eviction notice, David. As per the clause, she has exactly 48 hours to vacate the Buckhead penthouse. Send the private security detail to oversee her packing tomorrow morning. She is only permitted to remove personal clothing and items she owned prior to the date of our marriage. Any jewelry, artwork, designer goods, or assets purchased with my capital remain on the premises. If she attempts to remove anything else, have the security team detain her and call the police. Execution confirmed, Liam. David said calmly. I will have the papers filed with the family court judge by morning. I am locking down the estate now. Thank you, Liam said. He tapped the red button on his screen. The call ended. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Liam finally looked down at the woman weeping at his feet. She was a crumpled, hyperventilating mess, entirely stripped of the power and prestige she had wielded like a weapon her entire life. He did not look angry. Anger implies passion. Anger implies that there is still some emotional connection left to burn. Liam was exhibiting absolute zero-degree detachment. Imani was no longer the love of his life. She was a toxic liability on a spreadsheet, and he had just balanced the books. Your access is revoked, Liam stated softly, delivering the final blow with devastating precision. You are not going to the charity gala next week. You do not exist in my world anymore. Calvin and Beatrice were backed against the far wall, watching their entire bloodline get financially slaughtered. They did not move to help Imani up from the floor. They knew that if they stepped into the blast radius, Liam would turn his wealth management team on them next. They were cowards to the very end, paralyzed by the realization that their golden goose had just been butchered. Marcus trembled by the doorway, his eyes wide with horror, as he realized the true danger of the circles he had messed with. He thought he was walking away with a clean 80 grand, but seeing Liam systematically erase a human being from his financial ecosystem made Marcus realize that his own reckoning was imminent. Imani looked around the room, her chest heaving as she realized that Liam was entirely serious. The credit cards in her designer purse were useless plastic. The penthouse she bragged about was effectively a locked fortress. She had absolutely nothing left. And when a narcissist is stripped of their power, their money, and their audience, they do not find remorse. They find a target. Cornered and desperate, Imani wiped the smeared makeup from her eyes and slowly turned her venomous gaze away from Liam, locking onto the people she blamed for her spectacular downfall. Imani pushed herself up from the floor. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, but the sheer force of her narcissistic rage propelled her forward. She marched straight toward Marcus, who had been trying to shrink into the doorway. She pointed a trembling finger at his chest, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You did this!" Imani shrieked, her voice echoing sharply down the corridor. "You pathetic, greedy little man! You took my money and you ruined my entire life. If you had just stayed quiet, if you had just taken the cash and disappeared like you were supposed to, none of this would be happening. You dragged me down because you are a failure and you wanted company." Marcus did not cower. The fear that had kept him quiet for the past year had been entirely replaced by the desperate realization that he had nothing left to lose. Liam had already promised to contact his firm. The federal investigators were already looming. He was going down, but he was absolutely not going down alone as the sole scapegoat for my sister's sociopathic ego. Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It was a sound stripped of all dignity. "I ruined your life," Marcus yelled back, stepping forward to meet her aggression. "You came to me. You orchestrated this entire nightmare. You cornered me when I was at my absolute lowest, and you forced me to blow up my own marriage just so you could feel like the superior sister." Imani tried to slap his hand away, screaming that he was a liar and a thief. But Marcus was already reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen. He unlocked it and held it up like a shield against her venom. "You want to talk about who ruined who?" Marcus demanded, his voice shaking with furious adrenaline. "Let us tell everyone in this room exactly how you convinced me to take that $82,000. Let us tell your husband how you operate when you do not get your way." He did not wait for her to argue. He looked directly at Liam, then at my parents, ensuring he had an audience for her final execution. He began to read the text message loudly and clearly. "If you do not file the divorce papers today, I will tell the senior partners at your firm about the 2DU. Is you expunged from your record last year," Marcus read, articulating every single word. "I will make sure you lose your license and your job by Friday. Take the 80,000, leave Zuri and destroy her completely. Or I will destroy you." The words slammed into the waiting room like physical blows. The absolute undeniable malice in that message stripped away any lingering shadow of a doubt. Imani had not just offered a bribe. She had engineered a hostile extortion scheme. She had placed a loaded gun to the head of my marriage and pulled the trigger purely for her own amusement. Liar, Imani screamed, lunging for the phone. "You typed that yourself. You faked it." Marcus easily sidestepped her, holding the screen up so Liam could see the timestamp and the sender contact information. "It is verified," Marcus spat. "I have the entire thread backed up. You blackmailed me, Imani. You are a monster." The reality of the situation finally penetrated the thick, delusional skulls of my parents. Calvin and Beatrice had spent the last 30 minutes watching their golden child systematically dismantled. They had watched their access to Liam's billions evaporate. They had watched the threat of federal prison edge closer to their own doorstep. And like the absolute cowards they were, they realized that standing next to Imani was a death sentence. The ship was sinking and the rats were preparing to eat each other to survive. Calvin stepped away from the wall, his face a mask of manufactured outrage. He pointed an accusing finger at his favorite daughter, instantly severing 3 decades of blind devotion. "How could you do this, Imani?" my father bellowed, infusing his voice with the righteous indignation of a betrayed patriarch. "How could you extort this man and drag our pristine family name into this gutter? We raised you to have integrity. We raised you to be a pillar of this community." Beatrice was right behind him, eagerly throwing her daughter under the bus to save her own skin. "You lied to us," my mother cried out, pressing a hand to her chest in mock horror. "You told us Liam wanted to support the family. You told us those consulting fees were a generous gift from a loving son-in-law. You made us accomplices to your sickness. You used us, Imani." Imani stopped screaming at Marcus and slowly turned to look at her parents. The betrayal on her face was almost comical. The golden child was experiencing the exact same systemic abandonment I had endured my entire life. She was looking at the people who had taught her that love was transactional, finally realizing that her account was overdrawn. Imani let out a high, hysterical laugh. It bordered on absolute madness. "You raised me to have integrity," she mocked, her voice dripping with venom as she advanced on my father. "You raised me to worship money, Calvin. You taught me that the only thing that mattered in this world was looking richer and better than everyone else. Do not stand there and pretend you have morals now." She whipped around to face my mother, her eyes wide and manic. "And you," Imani hissed at Beatrice. "You knew I was not consulting for anything. You took that $15,000 every single month, and you never asked a single question because you were too busy running to the dealership to upgrade your car. You gladly spent stolen money to impress your bridge club. You loved every second of it." "That is a lie," Beatrice shrieked, her facade crumbling as the truth hit her. "We did not know." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Imani roared back, completely unhinged now. "You hated Zuri just as much as I did. You constantly told me I had to stay ahead of her. You told me I had to secure my status. I did this for us. I stole that money to keep this family at the top of the food chain, and now you are trying to act like innocent bystanders. You are just as guilty as I am." The waiting room devolved into an absolute bloodbath. Calvin shouted over Imani, threatening to disown her. Beatrice was sobbing and hurling insults, calling her own daughter a sociopath and a thief. Imani screamed right back, exposing specific lies my parents had told, naming the exact luxury purchases they had made with the laundered funds. They were viciously tearing each other apart, ripping the flesh from their own family tree in a desperate, pathetic attempt to escape accountability. I stood silently next to Liam. We watched the empire of lies burn to the ground. The family that had demanded I sacrifice my sanity to protect their image was now actively slaughtering each other to survive. It was the most beautiful, violent justice I had ever witnessed. I watched them tear each other to pieces. The elite Dubois family stripped of their country club memberships, their stolen money, and their manufactured prestige, acting like feral animals in a hospital waiting room. They were viciously exposing every secret they had ever kept, desperate to deflect the blame and escape the blast radius of Liam's incoming legal strike. I felt absolutely nothing for them. No pity, no residual daughterly affection, no guilt. The emotional ties had been severed cleanly and permanently. I turned away from the screaming match and walked over to the glass coffee table. I picked up the physical copies of the wire transfer logs. I gathered the DNA test results and the printed text messages Marcus had provided. Moving with deliberate, unhurried precision, I stacked the papers together, tapped the edges against the table to align them perfectly, and slid them into my leather briefcase. I placed my silver iPad right next to the documents. The sharp metallic click of my briefcase latches snapping shut echoed like a gunshot. The sound was barely audible over the shouting, but it somehow pierced the chaos. Beatrice stopped screaming at Imani. She whipped her head around and saw me securing my bag, preparing to leave. The sudden realization that her scapegoat daughter was walking out the door with the only remaining shred of leverage sent my mother into a fresh panic. She realized that Liam was a lost cause, Calvin was paralyzed by his own impending ruin, and Imani was a toxic liability who had just dragged them all into federal crosshairs. Her survival instincts immediately locked onto me. Beatrice abandoned her husband and her golden child, rushing across the waiting room. Her designer heels clicked frantically against the linoleum. She threw herself at me, her hands grabbing my forearm with a desperate, crushing grip. "Zuri, wait!" she gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. "You cannot just leave us like this. You have to talk to Liam. You have to make him see reason." I looked down at the hands gripping my jacket. The same hands that had pointed me toward the door a year ago. the same hands that had eagerly accepted stolen cash while I was drowning in grief. I did not pull away immediately. I let her cling to me, letting her feel the absolute unyielding stone I had become. "Zuri, please," Beatrice begged, her voice dropping into a pathetic whining register. "You are the only one he will listen to right now. He respects you. He respects your audit. Tell him to drop the lawsuits against me and your father. Tell him we were just pawns in Imani's game. If he freezes our assets and calls the foundation board, we will lose the house. We will go to federal prison. You cannot let your own parents go to prison over a misunderstanding." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and overflowing with terrified tears. It was the exact same expression she used to get out of speeding tickets or to manipulate country club waitstaff. But I was entirely immune to the performance. I stared at her, searching my heart for even a fraction of an ounce of sympathy, but the vault was entirely empty. I felt nothing but utter clinical indifference. "A year ago, when I sat on your kitchen floor crying because my husband left me, you told me I was a disappointment," I said, my voice echoing with terrifying absolute calm. The words cut through the remaining noise in the room, silencing Calvin and Amani completely. "You stood over me while I was hyperventilating, completely shattered by a betrayal I did not understand. You looked down at your weeping daughter, and you told me I was a failure because my career could not keep a man warm. You told me I brought it on myself." Beatrice swallowed hard, her grip on my arm loosening slightly as the sheer coldness of my gaze paralyzed her. "I was just," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I was just upset, Zuri. I did not mean it. I was trying to make you strong." "You meant every single word," I corrected her, smoothly refusing to let her rewrite history. "You needed me to be a failure so you could justify worshipping a thief. You needed a scapegoat so you did not have to look in the mirror and see what you had actually raised. Well, look at your golden child now." I gestured toward Imani, who was still slumped on the floor weeping and utterly destroyed, stripped of the marriage and the wealth that defined her entire existence. I gestured toward Calvin, who was leaning against the wall, hyperventilating as he calculated his impending prison sentence and the absolute loss of his social standing. "Look at yourselves," I demanded, my voice ringing with total finality. "You built a kingdom on stolen money and lies. You traded your souls for luxury cars and social status. You happily watched my life burn to the ground to keep yourselves warm. And you expected me to be the collateral damage." I reached down and effortlessly peeled her fingers off my arm. She did not resist. The fight had completely drained out of her body. Her arms fell limply to her sides as the reality of her execution finally settled into her bones. "Enjoy the ruins," I whispered. I turned away from my mother and looked at Liam. He was standing near the doorway, watching the fallout of his marriage with the cold detachment of a man calculating his tax write-offs. I gave him a single respectful nod. He returned it, acknowledging the professional courtesy of a perfectly executed audit. There was no need for pleasantries or drawn-out goodbyes. We both knew exactly what needed to be done next. The accounts were frozen. The legal machinery was already in motion. The predators had been caught and caged. I gripped the handle of my briefcase and turned my back on the Dubois family. I walked toward the heavy glass doors of the waiting room. I did not look back when Imani started screaming my name, begging me to come back and fix it. I did not pause when Calvin yelled that I was making a massive mistake that would ruin our bloodline forever. I did not break my stride when my mother collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing hysterically as her elite facade finally disintegrated into dust. I pushed through the double doors and stepped out into the main corridor of the hospital. The sterile, quiet air of the hallway felt incredibly pure compared to the toxic wasteland I had just left behind. I walked past the nurses' station, past the elevators, and straight out the front entrance of the building. The warm Atlanta sun hit my face, bright and absolute. I took a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in 32 years, I was not carrying the weight of their expectations. I was not absorbing their toxicity. I had delivered the truth, balanced the ledgers, and walked away entirely free. The execution was complete, and I was leaving them exactly where they belonged, trapped forever in the wreckage of their own making. The 48-hour clock began ticking the exact second Liam ended his phone call in that hospital waiting room. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta 2 days later, the financial apocalypse I had initiated reached its absolute devastating conclusion. I did not need to be physically present to witness the execution. The legal and financial networks of the city operated with a ruthless efficiency that required no supervision. I sat at my desk in my corner office, sipping a black coffee, watching the updates roll in through public filing alerts and discreet messages from Liam's legal team. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military strike. Imani's eviction from the Buckhead penthouse was handled with zero sentimentality. Liam did not show up to supervise her departure. He completely removed himself from the equation, delegating the task to a private security firm and a junior lawyer who had absolutely no patience for her theatrics. According to the eviction report filed with the building management, Imani spent the first 12 hours locked in the master bedroom, frantically calling Liam's phone, which immediately routed her to a legal voicemail. When she finally emerged, she attempted to pack 3 large designer trunks with jewelry, haute couture, and expensive accessories purchased during the marriage. The security team stopped her at the door. They systematically opened her luggage, removed every single item that violated the severe fraud penalty clause of the prenuptial agreement, and placed it all back inside the apartment. They stripped her of her armor. Imani was forced to empty her pockets, leaving behind the diamond engagement ring, the platinum watches, and the keys to her luxury SUV. She was allowed to leave with exactly 2 standard-sized suitcases containing clothing she owned prior to marrying Liam. When she stepped into the private elevator for the last time, her access fob was deactivated remotely. She walked out of the opulent marble lobby of the residential tower, dragging 2 scuffed suitcases behind her. There was no private driver waiting at the curb. Her credit cards were declined when she attempted to order a premium rideshare service. The woman who had built her entire identity on projecting wealth and superiority was reduced to standing on the sidewalk in the Georgia heat, waiting for a standard taxi, carrying nothing but her old clothes and the crushing weight of her own hubris. But Imani's exile was only the first wave of the fallout. The true spectacle was reserved for Calvin and Beatrice. My parents, driven by a delusional, desperate need to maintain their social standing, had attempted to act as though nothing was wrong. Less than 24 hours after the hospital confrontation, they drove their matching leased Porsches to the Buckhead Country Club for a scheduled luncheon. They genuinely believed they could outrun the scandal by simply ignoring it. They smiled at the valet, waved to the club president, and sat down at their usual table overlooking the 18th hole, ordering expensive wine and imported seafood to prove to everyone that the Dubois family was still untouchable. The illusion shattered when the bill arrived. Beatrice handed the waiter her heavy metal credit card with a practiced, condescending smile. 3 minutes later, the club manager approached their table. He did not speak loudly, but in the hushed, gossipy atmosphere of an elite dining room, a whisper travels faster than a shout. He informed my parents that the card had been declined. Not just declined, but flagged for suspected fraudulent activity. Calvin confidently pulled out his own primary debit card, brushing off the incident as a banking error. The manager returned, shaking his head. That account had also been frozen. The panic finally set in. My parents were forced to empty their wallets, scraping together enough physical cash to cover the meal and tip, leaving the dining room with their faces burning under the suspicious stares of the very society friends they worshipped. They rushed home, locking the doors behind them, but a locked door cannot stop a court order. Bright and early the next morning, exactly 48 hours after the hospital confrontation, the legal hammer dropped. Liam's attorneys filed a massive civil lawsuit against Calvin and Beatrice Dubois, explicitly detailing the embezzlement of over $400,000 through a phantom consulting firm. Because the evidence of wire fraud was so overwhelming and irrefutable, a superior court judge immediately granted an emergency injunction. Process servers arrived at my parents' sprawling suburban house before they had even finished their morning coffee. The servers handed Calvin a thick stack of legal documents that effectively paralyzed his entire existence. The lawsuit did not just demand repayment, it actively seized their lives. Liens were instantly placed on the house. Their domestic bank accounts, retirement portfolios, and remaining credit lines were completely frozen. They were legally prohibited from selling, moving, or hiding a single asset. The most public humiliation arrived 30 minutes later in the form of two heavy-duty tow trucks. Because the luxury vehicles were purchased using funds traced directly back to the stolen capital, they were classified as illicit assets, subject to immediate repossession. The loud hydraulic grinding of the tow trucks backing into the driveway drew the attention of the entire upscale neighborhood. Beatrice ran out onto the front lawn, still wearing her silk bathrobe, screaming at the drivers to stop. She threw herself against the hood of her Porsche, weeping hysterically and begging them not to take her car. The neighbors, the very people my parents had spent years trying to impress and intimidate, stepped out onto their manicured lawns and watched the spectacle unfold. They saw Beatrice sobbing over a piece of metal. They saw Calvin standing paralyzed on the porch, holding a stack of court summons, his face ashen and defeated. The elite facade they had guarded with such vicious cruelty was completely dismantled in broad daylight. They could not hire a high-powered defense attorney to fight the injunction because they had zero access to liquid cash. They could not call their wealthy friends for a loan because the news of the embezzlement lawsuit was already ripping through the country club gossip network like a shockwave. They were financially, legally, and socially quarantined. I sat in my office watching the digital confirmation of the asset freeze populate on my secure monitor. I felt no guilt. I felt no obligation to reach out and offer them a lifeline. They were drowning in the exact same ocean they had tried to drown me in. The ledgers were officially balanced. The debt had been collected. I closed the file on the Dubois family, locked my screen, and turned back to my work, leaving them to suffocate in the ruins of their own greed. The news did not just leak into the insular, hyper-competitive world of Atlanta's elite social circles. It detonated. In a community where reputation is the ultimate currency and perception dictates your survival, a federal wire fraud scandal is not just a misstep. It is a highly contagious disease. By Monday morning, the digital copies of Liam's civil lawsuit against Calvin and Beatrice were circulating through encrypted group chats, country club locker rooms, and private charity board meetings. The sheer speed of their social execution was breathtaking to witness. Calvin and Beatrice received their official excommunication via a private courier. It arrived in a heavy cream-colored envelope bearing the embossed seal of the Buckhead Country Club. There was no polite phone call or request for a meeting. The board of directors had convened an emergency session over the weekend and voted unanimously. Citing the strict moral turpitude clause in their bylaws, the club permanently revoked their membership. They were banned from the dining room, the golf course, and all future events. Their names were physically removed from the locker room plaques. My father, driven by a desperate refusal to accept his new reality, spent 3 hours calling every influential man he had ever played golf with, hoping to cash in decades of superficial networking. He dialed judges, real estate developers, and corporate executives. Every single call went straight to voicemail. When my mother tried to contact the women from her prestigious luncheon circle, she found that she had been preemptively blocked on every social media platform. The elite society they had sacrificed their own daughter to impress had closed its doors and locked them out completely. They were left sitting in a dark, foreclosed suburban house, entirely isolated, realizing that their friendships were just as hollow as their bank accounts. Imani experienced a much steeper, more violent fall from grace. Stripped of the penthouse and forced to drag her 2 scuffed suitcases into a cheap roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, she desperately tried to deploy her usual narcissistic charm. She pulled out her phone and started calling the women she co-chaired the Heritage Foundation Gala, with expecting them to rally behind her and offer her a guest house to stay in. She genuinely believed her charm and beauty would save her. Instead, she hit a concrete wall of absolute rejection. Her so-called best friends did not just ignore her calls. One of them actually answered purely to deliver a verbal execution. The woman explicitly told Imani that she was a toxic liability. She informed my sister that the foundation board had already voted to replace her as co-chair, erasing her name from all the promotional materials for the upcoming gala. The woman then advised Imani to lose her number permanently before hanging up. Sitting on a lumpy motel bed staring at a phone that would never ring again, Imani finally confronted the horrifying truth of her existence. Nobody had ever loved her for her personality, her intellect, or her character. They had only tolerated her because she was married to Liam's capital. Without his wealth to prop her up, she was entirely invisible. The golden child was reduced to an absolute nobody, utterly abandoned by the superficial world she had worshipped. While my family was being systematically erased from high society, the professional execution of my ex-husband was being carried out with ruthless corporate precision. Marcus genuinely thought he could lay low, ride out the divorce drama, and keep his lucrative job at the brokerage firm. He vastly underestimated the reach of a betrayed billionaire. Liam did not need to confront Marcus in an alleyway or shout at him over the phone. Liam simply instructed his legal team to compile a comprehensive compliance report. They gathered the authenticated wire transfer logs showing the $82,000 bribe, the screenshots of the extortion texts regarding the expunged DUIs, and the forensic evidence of Marcus's hidden offshore gambling debts. They sent that meticulously organized dossier directly to the senior managing partners and the chief compliance officer at Marcus's brokerage firm. In the financial sector, unethical behavior is a fireable offense, but extortion and offshore gambling debt make you an immediate regulatory hazard. Marcus was called into a glass-walled conference room at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. He was not given a chance to explain or defend himself. He was terminated for gross misconduct on the spot. His corporate access badge was deactivated while he was still sitting in the chair. 2 armed security guards escorted him to his desk, handed him a cardboard box for his personal items, and marched him straight out the front doors of the building in full view of his entire department. Furthermore, the firm reported his termination to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. With a documented history of extortion and massive offshore debt, his broker licenses were effectively suspended pending a formal investigation. Marcus was permanently blacklisted. The career he had prized, the steady income he had bragged about, and the professional reputation he had guarded were completely vaporized in less than 20 minutes. He was left standing on the pavement with a cardboard box, utterly unemployable and drowning in the very debts he had tried to escape by ruining my life. I sat in my office and watched the final dominoes fall. I did not throw a party, and I did not gloat. I simply reviewed the updates as they filtered through my professional and social networks, experiencing a profound analytical satisfaction. The symmetry of their destruction was poetic. The universe had balanced the ledger with absolute perfection. Every single person who had participated in my pain had been systematically stripped of the exact thing they valued most. Calvin and Beatrice valued prestige, so they were publicly disgraced and banished. Imani valued wealth and status, so she was left destitute and invisible. Marcus valued his career and his self-preservation, so he was blacklisted and professionally ruined. They had all traded their morality for a shortcut to the top, and I had simply removed the ladder, letting gravity do the rest. 6 months is a surprisingly brief amount of time to build an entirely new life. But when you are no longer dragging the dead weight of a toxic family, you can move forward with breathtaking speed. I sat behind the expansive mahogany desk in my new corner office, watching the morning sun reflect off the sleek glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta. The bold gold lettering on the frosted glass door outside read, "Senior Partner, a promotion I had secured not through nepotism, family connections, or country club networking, but through an unbroken, undeniable track record of forensic excellence." The air in my office was quiet, still, and completely free of the suffocating anxiety that used to define my daily existence. I had legally, financially, and permanently severed all ties with Calvin, Beatrice, and Imani. I blocked their numbers across all devices, ignored the pathetic handwritten letters they occasionally tried to sneak through my firm's corporate mailroom, and instructed my building security to treat them as active trespassers. The silence they left behind was not an empty void or a painful loss. It was a luxurious, pristine canvas. I did not miss them. I did not miss the constant comparisons, the backhanded compliments, or the desperate, exhausting need to earn a type of love that was always strictly conditional. The mental and physical space they used to occupy in my mind had been fully reclaimed and repurposed for my own peace. Instead of internalizing their psychological abuse, I channeled every single ounce of the betrayal I had survived into a highly specialized lethal weapon for others. I pitched a new initiative to the executive board of my firm, and they approved it unanimously within an hour. I established and now currently direct a pro bono financial task force dedicated exclusively to uncovering financial infidelity and hidden assets in high net worth divorces. My team takes on cases for women who are being systemically gaslit, manipulated, and financially starved by predatory partners attempting to hide capital in offshore accounts, shell companies, and phantom consulting firms. I sit across the conference table from terrified, exhausted women who have been repeatedly told they are crazy, paranoid, and worthless, and I hand them the certified bank logs that prove they were right all along. I watch the exact moment the light returns to their eyes, that glorious, powerful second when they realize they are not broken, they are just being robbed. We strip predatory spouses of their leverage, freezing hidden assets before they can be liquidated, and ensuring that the victims walk away with exactly what they are legally and morally owed. It is deeply, profoundly satisfying work. I took the absolute worst chapter of my life and weaponized my trauma to ensure that no other woman in this city would ever have to sit on her kitchen floor and believe she deserved to be completely destroyed. A polite knock on my glass door pulled me from my thoughts. My executive assistant stepped aside to let Liam walk into the office. The transition from brother-in-law to respected professional associate had been remarkably seamless. We were bound by the strange clinical camaraderie of two people who had survived the exact same execution squad and lived to tell the tale. Liam looked rested, sharp, and entirely unburdened by the parasitic weight of his former marriage. The dark, heavy circles that used to shadow his eyes during the final toxic months of his relationship with Imani were completely gone. He carried a sleek leather portfolio and 2 cups of artisan coffee from the boutique cafe down the street. He set 1 cup on my desk and took a seat in the leather chair opposite me, his posture relaxed and confident. I brought the final closeout documents for the Crescent Holdings liquidation, Liam said, sliding the portfolio across the polished mahogany surface. The federal investigators officially concluded their inquiry yesterday afternoon. The recovery of the misappropriated funds is 100% complete, and the remaining tax liabilities have been entirely resolved. The files are yours for the final sign-off. I took the portfolio, briefly reviewing the top sheet. The numbers were perfect balance down to the final cent. The Dubois family debt was settled, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bitter shame of their public ruin. We sat together in comfortable, respectful silence for a moment, drinking our coffee and watching the bustling city move far below us. Liam leaned back in his chair, his blue eyes studying my face with a mixture of deep professional respect and quiet curiosity. "You have built an incredible operation here, Zuri," he noted, gesturing to the thick stack of pro bono case files resting on the corner of my desk. "You took an absolute nightmare scenario and turned it into an empire that actually protects people." I nodded, taking another sip of the dark roast. "The math always works out eventually, Liam. You just have to be willing to do the hard calculations and follow the data wherever it leads." He smiled, a genuine relaxed expression that reached his eyes. He looked out the floor to ceiling windows, watching the morning traffic flow through the major arteries of Atlanta. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his tone soft and entirely devoid of judgment. "Do you ever look back at how thoroughly their entire world came down and regret burning it all to the ground?" I stood up from my desk and walked over to the glass standing beside him as we both looked out over the sprawling skyline of the city, where my parents used to pretend they were untouchable royalty. I felt the warm morning sun on my face, I thought about my thriving career, the profound peace in my apartment, and the beautiful, fiercely loyal, chosen family of friends and colleagues I had surrounded myself with. I looked back at Liam, a calm, unshakable certainty radiating from my core. "I did not burn anything down, Liam," I replied, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute, undeniable truth. "I just handed them the matches they bought." The profound lesson here is that blood does not automatically define family. True family is built on mutual respect and unconditional support, rather than social status or financial gain. When people prioritize superficial prestige over human decency, they inevitably destroy the relationships that matter most. Setting firm boundaries and walking away from toxic environments is never an act of cruelty, but a vital act of self-preservation. Empires built on lies and manipulation will always collapse. Authentic peace is achieved only when you have the courage to walk away and build a life rooted entirely in truth. Share your own journey of setting healthy boundaries in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of ultimate empowerment.